Okay, everybody, I have just about 1 o'clock. I'm going to go ahead and get started. And there are a lot of people missing, but hopefully they will trickle in as we go along. So I wanted to start off by just making a couple of announcements. First, this training is going to be recorded and archived. I'm going to put the link up on YouTube after we're finished here. So feel free to share it with any of your colleagues that were not able to attend or participate today. Have a couple of announcements for the WISs and for the VR staff on the line because we have a combination of both. For the WISs on the line, you can count your participation in the webinar today as part of your continuing ed credits if you were certified through Cornell. The webinar will last for about an hour, so you can log in 1 hour as part of your continuing ed credits. If you have any questions about how to access your Cornell portal to log in those credits, you can email Michelle Elvord at msa224@cornell.edu, and Michelle will log in those credits for you or walk you through how to log them in. Okay, for the VR staff on the line, CRCs are available as part of your participation today. If those are something that you require, just shoot me an email after the training at Michael, MICHAEL, .klinger, KLINGER, at dars.virginia.gov, and I will make sure those CRCs get accredited for you. Okay, so I wanted to start out just by giving you a little brief overview of the Your Money, Your Goals toolkit that we'll be touching on today. So Your Money, Your Goals was developed by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or CFPB, as a way to help clients set financial goals and develop plans on how to reach their goals. Now, you don't need to be a financial planner or expert to use these tools. I'm going to show you how you can use them pretty much in every case and every client that you work with. And I developed a sample case study that you should see on the screen because I wanted to have a hypothetical case to use to go through the tools to kind of show you guys how you could use them in a practical way. And you should all have a copy of this. I sent around a copy of the case study and the Your Money, Your Goals toolkit. However, if you registered within the last 24 hours, you would not have these yet because I didn't check the registration list this morning. So if you registered in the last 24 hours, if you don't have these, shoot me an email at the end and I will be glad to give you the materials. Okay. So I just wanted to start out by going through the sample case that I put together. So I gave you the story of Daniel, and Daniel is a 20-year-old with cerebral palsy. He receives SSI and lives with his parents. He does contribute to household expenses, so he gets the full amount of SSI of $735 per month, which is the maximum of anybody living in Virginia. And Doris has recently found him a part-time job that is $8.25 an hour for 20 hours per week, which comes out to about, excuse me, I'm hearing a lot of background noise. That might be on my end. I apologize for the technical difficulty. Let me make sure that everybody that is on is muted. Okay, so I just muted everybody that came on. I apologize for that. So let me start over. I gave you the case of Daniel, 20-year-old with cerebral palsy. He receives SSI and lives with his parents. Because he contributes to household expenses, he receives the maximum SSI payment of $735 a month. However, he's been working with DARS on job placement, and his VR counselor has recently found him a job working part-time. The job pays $8.25 an hour for 20 hours a week, which works out to about $709.50 per month, roughly. So, in addition to the job placement, he's also completed his driver's training at WWRC, which he has successfully completed, and he was able to take his driver's test in a vehicle equipped with hand controls, and he passed that test. So now that he's got his license, he has a goal to purchase his own vehicle and have it equipped with the hand controls so he can get back and forth to his job. DARS is going to assist with those vehicle modifications for the hand controls as part of his employment plan, but he needs to purchase the car first. In the meantime, parents are going to help out with transportation to and from work. And he has a friend who is selling a used car for $5,000. And I'm going to stop on the case study right there and just kind of jump into the tools to show you exactly how you would be able to use these tools to turn the client's want of purchasing this car into a feasible goal with an action plan. So if you had Daniel coming into your office telling you, I have this $5,000 car that I want to purchase, I don't have the money to do it, what do I do? We're going to go through the next steps and how to help him reach that goal. So Cfpb has developed an acronym called SMART goals, and they recommend setting a SMART goal when you're first looking at how to help a client achieve a goal. And I wanted to start with this acronym just because I thought it was just kind of a cool concept. And I'm hearing background noise again. Just give me a minute and just make sure that everybody's on mute again. Sorry about that. You know, DARS just recently switched from GoToMeeting to Zoom, and this is only my second webinar using Zoom, still trying to get the hang of it. So if there's a technical difficulty, just please bear with me. But anyway, just wanted to go through the CFPB's concept of SMART goals. And this is what they recommend that you do for a client who has a goal. So first, you want to start out by asking yourself, does the client have a specific goal that they want to achieve? What is it that they want to obtain or accomplish, and why is it important? Well, in this case, in this hypothetical, you know that what the client wants to obtain is the vehicle, and it's related to his goal of maintaining and retaining his employment. He needs to get back and forth to his job that his counselor found for him. The M in SMART goal stands for measurable. So how much is it going to cost? We know from the hypothetical that the car is going to cost him around $5,000. But how will he know when he achieves that goal, and how is he going to track his progress in meeting it? And we're going to go through a tool in just a couple minutes that was designed to help the service provider develop an action plan with the client to help him track when his needs are going to be met, when his goals are going to be met. The A in SMART goals stands for, is it able to be reached? Is it feasible? In this case, buying a used car is obtainable. It is feasible. If a client had a goal of maybe winning the lottery and retiring at 30, maybe that wouldn't be a feasible goal, but certainly buying a used car is. The R stands for relevant. Is it something that the client really wants and really needs, and are they in a position at this point in their lives to achieve that goal? And it's not only a want, but it's an essential need for him to purchase this vehicle so he has reliable transportation to keep his job. And finally, the T stands for time bound. So does the client have a specific time frame of when he's going to reach this goal? And when we go back to the case study in just a couple minutes, we'll talk about the timeline that he has to reach it. Wanted to talk a little bit about their section on turning goals into financial targets. So how do you take what a client wants and turn it into a feasible goal? Obviously, the first thing that you're going to have to figure out with the client is how they're going to pay for the item or service they need and how much they're going to have to set aside in order to meet the goal. So when we go back to the case study, we know that the car that he wants to purchase from the friend is $5,000. And the CFPB recommends following the following formula. So the amount needed for the goal divided by the number of weeks to reach the goal equals the amount to set aside each week. I did it in terms of a monthly amount to set aside. And let's just go back to the case study for a minute so you can see the breakdown. And I recommended that the client write a plan to achieve self-support or a PASS plan to help him reach his goal of purchasing a vehicle. Now, everybody that's on the line should know what a PASS is, but just in case you don't or need a little refresher, a PASS plan is a savings plan that allows anybody who is on SSI or can become eligible for SSI by using the plan to set aside their wages or their unearned income like SSDI aside into a special savings account to save up for an item or service related to a educational or vocational goal, and any money that's put aside into that account does not count for the purposes of determining their SSI check. So essentially, what the client could do in this case is to put his wages into a PASS plan, his part-time job wages into that PASS plan. That money won't count in determining his SSI check. He can use that money to make his car payments and then still get a full $735 in an SSI. So I recommended in this case that the client write a PASS. And so we're going to say the VR counselor plans to refer him to a work incentive specialist advocate or WISA for possible development for a plan to achieve self-support. So his gross pay is $709.50 in his job. I took out 20% as a tax estimate, so really he has about $567.50 per month to put aside. And I'm going to pause just for a second and mute the participants again. I'm sorry about this. They're all supposed to be muted at the time they come on, but it doesn't seem to be working. All right, so he has $567.50 per month available to put into the PASS plan. And so what his friend is allowing him to do is allowing him to come up with half, or $2,500. Once he comes up with the $2,500, then the friend will allow him to have the car and pay the rest over time. So he needs to come up with $2,500 off the bat, and then he can pay the rest off over time. If the client were to put $567.50 aside into a PASS, he would have enough for his down payment in about 5 months. And again, you know, the CFPB recommends that you look at weekly. If you wanted to do that, then it would take him about 36 weeks to reach the goal, but I did it monthly. And it looks like there's a question in the chat box. Yeah. If you have, if you're coming in online and you're not muted, please mute yourself to cut down on some of the background noise. It's just a little bit distracting. Please and thank you. Next section talks a little bit about revising goals. So in this situation, I had everything work out really neatly, where the client goes and applies for a PASS plan. He's able to save up to $2,500 by putting his monthly paycheck aside, and he's able to put the down payment on the car pretty quickly within 5 months of the approval of the plan. Obviously, in a real life situation, it might not always work out that way. You know, sometimes clients get sick. They need to take time off work. Sometimes their hours get cut. Sometimes they have to stop working altogether. And if that happened to a client, then that would obviously change his plan and his goals. So this section talks a little bit about when it would be appropriate to talk to a client about revising a goal. Now, for example, if the financial situation changes and the amount that the client is saving is more than what makes sense to them, this turns out to be more than they can afford. If his hours got cut or something and he couldn't afford to put the $567 into the PASS every month, then that would be an example of maybe amending his goal to maybe put less aside. Talk about revising goals if they use up any savings they have. Their savings are exhausted and they can't meet their goal. Circumstances change, new job, loss of job, decrease in hours, increase in hours. Those kind of things can be relevant to how quickly somebody can achieve their goal. And if they have a value change and a goal no longer feels relevant, like if the client's going along and he decides, oh, I don't really want that car, after all, I want to focus on a different goal, that would be an appropriate time to discuss appropriate revision to their goal plan. One thing to remember about goal setting is that goals are never set in stone. And like if a client was to develop a pass, the pass is not set in stone either. If a client used a pass to like save for a vehicle and then found they could no longer do that, or they need an extension on the amount of time they needed to save up for the vehicle, or if they needed to suspend the pass for the time being, all that can be done with Social Security in writing. So goals can always be changed. Wanted to take a couple minutes to go through the CFPB's goal setting tool. And this is where the client can list their short-term goals, which is anything defined that they can achieve within the next 6 months, and then the long-term goals of things that they can achieve that might take them longer than 6 months. So short-term, 6 months or less, long-term, 6 months or more. Going back to the case study, if you were going to use the example of the client wanting to purchase the vehicle, maybe his short-term goal is to save up enough money for the down payment. That would go on the short-term side. Long-term goal is to eventually pay off the car. It's going to take about 9 months to save the $5,000. So short-term is putting down the down payment. Long-term is actually paying the vehicle off. Those are an example of a short-term versus a long-term goal that you could put down there. Next part of the goal setting tool is the SMART goals. Talked a little bit about this: specific, measurable, able to be reached, relevant, and time-bound. Again, this is where you could list any short-term goals that the client has and a long-term goal. Going back to the car example, again, the down payment would be the short-term, paying off the vehicle would be the long-term goal. It's going to take longer than 6 months. But, it does meet all the criteria for a SMART goal. A car is a good example because it's specific. The client wants to achieve the purchase of the vehicle. That's what they want. It's measurable because they have a savings plan put in place to save up for it. It's able to be reached. It's feasible. They have a feasible plan as to how long it's going to take. They know how much money they need and how long it's going to take for them to save up that money. It's relevant because he needs it for the job. And it's time-bound. He knows that within the next 9 months, he'll have enough to buy the vehicle outright. So it meets all the criteria for a SMART goal as CFPB defines them. But the vehicle obviously is just an example. These can be used for clients in any scenario. The step 3 is the action plan. So this is where you would help a client detail exactly what steps are needed for them to achieve a goal. So you see action steps here, the resources needed, the date to complete the step, and when the step is completed. So an example of an action step, if you're looking at, if you're a VR counselor and you're looking at making a referral to a WISA to help a client write a pass, the first action step would be make the referral to the WISA and what date you did that. If a WISA was using it, an action step would be to actually meet with the client to put together a draft of the pass plan. That would be the first action step. The date that it was the date to complete it and the date it actually was completed. Sometimes those dates are going to vary. A service provider might think, oh, I might be able to write the pass plan by, let's say, November 1st, and actually it doesn't get submitted to Social Security to November 15th. So sometimes the dates to complete the steps and the actual completed dates are going to vary a little bit. But after they submit the plan, the next action step might be if Social Security comes back and says, okay, it seems like a feasible plan, but we want you to fix X, Y, and Z. There might be some amendments needed to the pass. So amending the pass with the client would be the next action step. The date that's expected to be completed and the date that it was. And it's not just all about the steps that the service provider is going to take either. It's also about the action steps that the client's responsible for. So an example of an action step that a client might take is that with an approved pass, they have to set up a separate account where they would keep their funds that they're using to save up for that vehicle, which is part of their vocational goal, separate from the money that they use to pay their living expenses. So an action step for a client might be to go to their bank or go to their credit union to open that separate account to deposit those wages in to save up for their goal. Next action step would be maybe after the amendments, the pass plan is approved by Social Security. Next action step would be to put the down payment on the vehicle, and then the final action step would be once they come up with the $2,500 down payment, they would continue to make the payments monthly until the vehicle was paid off. And of course, action steps also might include any changes that are needed to the pass. If there's an amendment or something like that that's needed, that can be put into an action step. Informing the client that they need to report any changes of hours or wages to Social Security as part of their pass can also be an action step. So this can also be action steps taken by a service provider to help a client reach the goal, and as well as some of the action steps the client's responsible for in order to meet their goal. So that's kind of a helpful way, I think, to keep a client organized in terms of the sequential steps they need in order to reach the goal that they're shooting for, keep them focused and keep them motivated to keep it going. Next step is to figure out the weekly targets. I already kind of did that for you. In the case study, we know how much he's going to have to put aside monthly in order to afford the vehicle that he wants. But this is just giving you an example of how to break it down in terms of feasible targets. So they give you an example of a client that wants to save $50 within 6 months to start an emergency savings fund. So they need $50. They have 24 weeks to save up to $50 because they want to do it in 6 months. So 50 divided by 24 is $2 a week, or about $8 a month. So a client would be able to save the $50 within a 6-month period by putting aside about $8 per month. That's an example of how to figure out a weekly target. And you can do that for short-term as well as long-term goals. Going back to the vehicle example, hate to harp on that, but it's just a practical example that I thought would help clarify this stuff. Short-term goal is to come up with the money for the down payment. The client needs $2,500. If they put aside X amount of dollars per week, how long is it going to take them to get there? I figured out using my figures that it would take about 5 months to save up the $2,500, and just about another 5 to pay off the vehicle. But you can break it down into short-term and long-term goals there. Okay, and I also wanted to just touch on the tool number 2. It's planning for life events and large purchases. And this kind of expands on the tool in module 1 where you use to set short and long-term goals. Short being 6 months or less, long being maybe more than 6 months. What makes this different is it really goes very far into the future, not just within the next year or two, but it goes down to, let's see, 5 to 10 years from now, 10 to 15 years from now, 15 to 20 years from now, and more than 20 years from now. Most clients might not know exactly where they want to be in 20 years from now, but it allows them to set goals for the foreseeable future, though. So within 1 year, the client wants to purchase a vehicle. That's going to cost $5,000. How are they going to pay for that? We use the example of the PASS plan. And with a PASS plan, a client has to show that they can afford to meet their expenses on an SSI check if they put their wages aside. So, for example, in order for a client to be approved for a PASS, they have to show that they can meet their living expenses on the 735 SSI check they get. So are they going to be able to do that? Are they going to be able to afford to save up for the vehicle and meet their living expenses? Or are there going to be things that they might have to cut out of their budget to make saving up for the vehicle more feasible? And using this chart, you can kind of get the clients to brainstorm. So if I'm having a financial struggle, if I'm having trouble meeting my expenses while saving up for my goal, maybe what can I cut out? An example might be you might have a client who goes out to eat 5 out of 7 days of the week, and then might be able to save more money just by eating at home. So that's just a practical way of maybe cutting some expenses to make the goal that they want to achieve more feasible. It's kind of just a way to get the client to think about prioritizing their long-term goal, in this case a vehicle, over maybe a short-term thing of spending the money at a restaurant or going shopping or what have you. It's a way to keep them focused on their long-term goal and to keep them motivated. So let's take another example. Instead of the vehicle, we know that in this hypothetical, the client is going to have his vehicle within a year. So what happens in a year or two from now if they have another goal? They might come back to DARS once the case is closed and says, well, I'm working part-time. I still got my part-time job, but I would really like to go to school so I can focus on furthering my education and maybe get a different job or move into a different field or, be more feasible to work part-time or full-time. So in a year or two from now, they might come to you with a goal of wanting to go to school. And you as the DARS counselor will have to, obviously figure out how much that's going to cost. And as we all know, DARS might not be in a position to help with the whole cost. So this is a way for you as the DARS counselor to get the client thinking about how else can they supplement what DARS is paying. Can they get a student loan? Are there any grants out there? Are there any other ways for them to pay for extra educational costs apart from what DARS will pay for? And again, if they have to put some money aside for tuition, how can they both save up for that tuition and meet their living expenses? They might have to cut things out. So in a lot of ways, as a service provider, these tools are meant to make your job easier, because what you're doing is you're helping the client narrow down a goal and getting them to think about practical steps that they can take to make reaching their goals more easier and feasible. Tool 3, buying a car, is not an actual tool. It just gives some examples of, how it's practical not to accept maybe the first offer that a client gets, maybe to go to some different dealerships and get some different estimates on the vehicle that a client would want. I'm not going to really go into that because for the purposes of our case study, the client already has a vehicle that they're going to purchase, but it just gives some tips to a client that they can go through if they were, looking in the market for a used vehicle. Usually, what I used to tell people is, if you want to buy a car, shop around for at least 3 estimates and go for the lowest one. You don't have to go out and buy a 2017 a brand new vehicle if you can buy a used car that can practically meet your needs and that you can afford. So basically, the tool 3 is just going through some tips that clients can apply when they're shopping around for a vehicle. All right. That's it for the Your Money, Your Goals tools that I'm going to go through today. I wanted to switch over to, and I think it might have got closed out. Just bear with me here. This got closed out when I opened up my Zoom window. I wanted to switch over to the Focus on People with Disabilities guide and to show you the assistive technology tool. So what the Focus on Disabilities guide is meant to do is to take some of the concepts and the Your Money, Your Goals toolkit and expand on them to make them specific for people with disabilities. And one of the tools that I thought was really interesting was one that they developed on how to talk to clients about paying for assistive technology devices. And I had this ready to go and it got closed out, so I apologize. Just bear with me for a moment while I get to the right page. Before I do that, here's a good one to touch on briefly. This is a questionnaire that you can use to start a money conversation with a client. That's often a very personal thing. A lot of clients don't really want to talk about their finances, whether they're behind in bills or what have you. But this is just a way to talk to them about some relevant topics in terms of what their financial goals are. So obviously, do you have a goal? Yes or no? Or I don't know. Do you have reliable transportation? Do you have a reliable source of income? How are you going to pay for the things that you're looking to save up for? Do you have money for emergencies? Do you have an emergency fund? If your vehicle was to break down or you got behind in your rent, would you have a way to get caught up? Or if an appliance broke down, would you have the money to replace it? Those sort of things. Do you have enough money to meet your expenses? Yes or no? Do you owe any money to the government or any other persons? Do you have a checking or savings account? And we'll get more into this topic in additional webinars. If you had time to go through the Your Money, Your Goals toolkit, you'll see that it's over 300 pages. Obviously, I can only touch on a fraction of that today. So there will be some additional webinars on some additional tools and topics, and a client being behind on bills is going to be one of those. And so we'll expand on a lot more of these topics in future webinars. But I just wanted to go through some of the questions that this CFPB recommends that you ask when you're starting a money conversation with a client. But I wanted to show you the assistive technology tool because this is really neat. And again, this is a supplement to the module that I went through in the Your Money, Your Goals toolkit with goal setting and planning for large purchases. But the Paying for Assistive Devices tool lists a lot of different things that a client might need, like mobility aids, wheelchairs, scooters, walkers, canes, crutches, prosthetics, and orthopedic devices, or cognitive assistance like computer software, maybe JAWS, if they need something like a screen reader, tasks to help them around the house, home modifications. Do they need a wheelchair ramp? Do they need a roll-in shower? Do they need a widening of doorways so they can get their wheelchair through? Grab bars in the bathrooms. Vehicle modifications. Now this is one that maybe our client could use. Let me stop here and go through an example. So I said in the case study that DARS would help the client pay for his hand controls, but modifications to a vehicle for somebody with CP is an example of an assistive technology that they might need. And it kind of gets the client thinking about ways they could pay for those hand controls. So on the chart here under assistive technology, the specific item and cost that the client would need would be the hand controls for the vehicle. Get the client thinking about whether or not any of that cost would be covered by insurance, Medicaid, Medicare, private insurance. If not, and if DARS can't cover the whole cost, what other ways are there to pay for assistive technology devices? Could he potentially work the cost of the hand controls into his pass plan? So in addition to just saving up for the vehicle, could he potentially amend the pass to put some extra money aside for the vehicle modifications? Are there ways to cut expenses or reduce the overall cost? So again, get the client thinking about ways that they can reduce maybe their monthly living expenses to save up for the things that they need. Okay. An example would be, I said a pass might work for this client, but maybe he's not a pass candidate. Maybe he would more qualify for an ABLE account, an Achieving a Better Life Experience account. For those of you that might need a little bit of background, an ABLE account is geared toward anybody who is on needs-based benefits such as SSI or Medicaid that was disabled prior to age 26. Now, that doesn't mean that a person who is not older than 26 couldn't be eligible for an ABLE account as long as their disability began before their 26th birthday. And so what an ABLE account allows people to do, if they're on SSI, for example, is to save up to $14,000 per year with a cumulative cap of $100,000 in an approved ABLE account without it impacting their SSI. So in our hypothetical case, the client's on SSI, maybe he has some additional money after the pass is over to pay for some assistive technology devices that he needs, and he puts that money into an ABLE account. So the money in that ABLE account doesn't count towards the $2,000 resource limit for SSI. So that could be another way for him to pay for these assistive technology adaptations that he needs, in addition to like a pass plan. So again, it's meant to make the service provider's job easier, to kind of give maybe the client some homework. Okay, think about what you need, think about whether or not your insurance will cover it, and how would you be able to pay for it if it's not covered by DARS and insurance. So it kind of puts it back on the client a little bit to take the chart that you put together home, do a little bit of research on the cost of some of the items that they're looking for, and different ways to pay for them. Okay. And that's the overview on assistive technology. And so I've been talking for about 40 minutes now, roughly. I wanted to take the last 20 minutes to answer any questions that you might have. And it looks like we already have a question in the chat box. So I'm going to stop now and take some questions. So Trina asks, what happens to the money if they don't use it for their pass goal? Technically, what would happen, Trina, in that case is if a client had a pass and they were not able to follow through with it, or they were not completing the pass, or not using the funds appropriately. So, for example, if they were set aside to pay for the vehicle and then Social Security was defined that they didn't use it for the purchase of that vehicle, they would make the client repay those funds. So the client couldn't keep the pass funds. If they don't complete the pass, technically those funds should go back to the Social Security Administration. Otherwise, the client could find themselves in an overpayment situation. Okay. So that's the only question I see in the chat box so far. Are there any others? So William asks, is there going to be a code as WISA? Okay, so in the future, we are looking to add helping a client set some of these financial goals as a WISA service. Right now, we're not in a position to add the overview of the whole toolkit as a WISA service. However, we are in the process of adding the financial health assessment as a WISA service. We haven't really been promoting that yet because we're still finalizing the language on what that's going to look like. We don't have a procedure code yet. But one of the things that you're eventually going to be able to do, Bill, as a billable service is to help the client do a financial health assessment at the time you meet with them, when you do a work world or any other WISA service. And some of the questions on the health assessment are going to be like, do you know your credit score? Or have you reviewed your credit report in the last 12 months? Are you behind on your bills? What are your sources of income? Do you have a checking account or savings account, or do you have a budget? And the goal of the health assessment is to use the responses that the client gives on that form to help develop their service plan. So an example would be if a client says one of their goals is to save more money as part of their financial health assessment, then you as the WISA could maybe talk with them about a pass plan or an ABLE account or some of the other things that would help them save that money and reach the goal that they listed on their questionnaire. So that's coming, but we don't have it ready to go just yet. Okay, so Rita asks, I am new to this. Can you further explain why the individual would not be able to keep the pass money if it is coming out of their Social Security check? Okay, so the reason why they wouldn't be allowed to keep the money, Rita, is because the money that's set aside into the pass is for a specific purpose. So in this case, we said the client was putting the money out of his checks aside to pay for his vehicle. So any money that the client puts aside does not count as income when the client is when Social Security is determining how much a client is eligible for an SSI. So what they're basically doing for the duration of the pass is not counting any of the income that the client gets that's putting aside when they're determining the SSI amount. So the client could potentially get a full SSI check of $735 for the duration of the pass while they're working. And so they would not be entitled to that full $735 check if they do not follow the guidelines that they set up when they originally had their pass approved, because Social Security is allowing their income to remain excluded, but if they don't follow through with the pass, then they were not entitled to the SSI they received during the duration of that pass, if that makes any sense. That's why Social Security would want them to pay it back. So, I mean, in a way, it is their money. You know, they're putting it aside for a purpose, but yet because it is a income exclusion and the client might have got more money than they were entitled to for the duration of the pass. If they don't follow through, then they could potentially be overpaid. Hope that makes sense. It's a little confusing. I know it's a lot, especially for somebody that's newer, so I um, hope that made sense. But if you have any other questions, you can always email me or call me, and I would be glad to talk you through it. Okay, she says, yes, that makes sense. Okay, great. Any other questions, concerns, or comments on the Your Money, Your Goals tools or the Focus on People with Disabilities guide? And like I said, I'll just repeat this for anybody that might have came in late. So obviously I was only able to go through a couple tools today because we only had an hour. There's about 330 some odd pages of the Your Money, Your Goals toolkit with various tools. Things like how to talk to a client about budgeting, how to talk to them about dealing with debt collectors, things of that nature that I did not go through today. But I am going to have a series of additional webinars throughout the late fall and early winter going into spring, where I'm going to do a webinar on a different tool in the toolkit every month. So eventually we will cover the whole toolkit. It's just going to take some time to do that given the length of it. So I will send out the invites to all the WISAs and all the VR staff as I did today. I don't have a training schedule finalized for the additional webinars yet, but I will send that out as soon as it is finalized. Okay. Any last questions, comments, concerns? All right. One last announcement, while I'm waiting for people to type, is I wanted to remind you about the pre and post surveys that I sent around when I sent out the materials. So this training is in partnership with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, CFPB, as part of our Career Pathways for Individuals with Disabilities grant. And so we are mandated to obtain these surveys from anybody that attended both pre and post surveys as part of our data collection for our participation. These go back to the CFPB, these surveys. So I do need those. I got a few pre-surveys from people, but if you haven't yet sent your pre-survey, please do so. You can either print it out, fill it out, and scan it back to me in the email, or if you have a version of Adobe that allows you to type in an editable PDF, you should be able to do it that way too. And please also complete the post surveys and get those back to me as soon as possible. Okay. If there are no other questions, I will end for today. And one last thing I want to mention is I said at the beginning you could share this recording with your colleagues, but also please share the resources in the toolkit. If there's an area of the Your Money, Your Goals or the Focus on Disabilities guide, if there's a specific tool that stands out to you as you're going through the toolkit and you think this would be helpful for your colleagues, please share the tools. The idea is to print them out and use them in the sessions with your consumers. So please feel free to share them. And Rita says, can the 300-page manual be ordered from the CFPB or do we have to download it? Yes, you can order paper copies of the manual, and I can email the information for anybody that's interested in ordering a hard copy to them. So if you want to order a hard copy, let me know, and I can send you the information on how to do that. And by the way, that brings up a good point that any of the resources are free. You guys can order as many copies of this toolkit as you want, and they are at no cost to you. And if we were doing this training in person, actually, you would have received the hard copies of the toolkit, but obviously, since this is a webinar, that's why I sent out the electronic versions. But yes, I can get you copies of that. Tara asks, will the full training be offered again? I was not able to attend the full training and would like to get caught up. This specific training will not be offered again. However, it was recorded and I'm going to archive it. So I'll send the links out to everybody at the conclusion of the training. All right, then, if that's all, I will let you go a few minutes early, but don't forget to email me if you're a VR staff and you need those CRCs, or if you need the materials in electronic format, or if you'd like to order the hard copies, shoot me an email and I'll get you that info. I want to thank you all for your time, attendance, and participation. I hope you found it helpful. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.